All right, Kayleen Asbo. So tell us about Mary Magdalene. Who is she?
Mary Magdalene is actually the female in the New Testament who has the largest role. There are more depictions of Mary Magdalene in the New Testament than any other woman, including Jesus' own mother. And she really stands at the pivot points of Christianity. What we have in the New Testament is the depiction of her as the faithful witness, who is there both to witness Jesus' death and suffering, and the faithful witness who comes to see and rejoice in the celebration of life on Easter Sunday. So she is at one point the guardian of the thresholds of life and death, and his foremost female disciple.
Wonderful. So you have spent years studying Mary Magdalene. What are some exciting discoveries that have happened?
Well, I would say that over the past 10 years, I've almost been obsessed with this topic. I have returned again and again, almost every year, to France, where in the French culture, the legends hold that she was the apostle who came to what was then Gaul at the time, southern France. And she evangelized and preached and taught, converting all of southern France to Christianity. So there's a whole body of mythology there, and some of the most important things that I've discovered in France are the caves in the southernmost region of a place called La Beaume. And this is where she was said to have spent the last 30 years of her life. It's a wonderful, amazing site. It was actually a site of pre-Christian worship to the Greek goddess Artemis for about 700 years before Mary Magdalene was said to have landed there. And it's also, this part is really exciting to me, it's also the birthplace of Western Christian monasticism in Europe. Because in the 400s, John Cassian came and established a double monastery. And this became actually the foundations of Benedictine spirituality. So I think one of the things I'm most excited about is tracing the thread of the contemplative Christian tradition as it goes from St. Benedict back to John Cassian, and then to Mary Magdalene herself, or at least the followers of Mary Magdalene, who claim to have received her teachings. So this actual site is very, very special, but in addition to that, the stories and the traditions that have come out of that tradition of contemplative chanting and the canonical offices, and even to some extent the whole process of Lectio Divina, of contemplative reading of Scripture, can be traced back to these very, very early days in France. And that's a puzzle piece that every year I go back to France and I gather new pieces and put together. And so the music, the art, the liturgy, the prayers, the stories, and the actual monasteries themselves have been my consuming quest for the past decade.
So you're talking about Mary Magdalene in a Christian context. What does she offer non-Christians?
One of the things I've been most excited about in my work is when I give lectures and workshops on Mary Magdalene, she really is the universal every woman. So I've had Jews and Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and agnostics and atheists all find that in her image is an example of humanity and specifically of women in their fullness. One of the words that's used to describe her in some of these early Christian texts that have been rediscovered in the past 100 years is this word anthropos, and it's related to the word anthropology, meaning fully human. And what Mary Magdalene offers our world today is a composite image of a woman who is a questing seeker, who is able to be present in the deepest sense of grief and suffering as she's watching her beloved teacher suffer and die, and someone whose heart is so open that even in the midst of grief, she's capable of seeing new life and rejoicing in that. So one of the images I think that Mary Magdalene offers us is this idea of spiritual maturity. William Blake said once that the definition of a spiritually mature human being was to hold grief in one hand and gratitude or joy in the other. And I think that Mary Magdalene stands as this archetypal image par excellence of someone who can do just that. There is no grief that we have gone through individually that she hasn't also suffered, whether that's the idea of her being persecuted throughout the centuries, falsely maligned as a prophet, condemned for sexual sin when historically there's no evidence for that, whether it's standing at the foot of grief and sorrow, whether it's being in exile. I think all of those are universal human themes that speak to everyone in their deepest sense of need fear, and grief. And yet at the same time, she's this towering figure of strength and hope and affirmation. In the Gospel of Mary, there's this wonderful image where all the disciples are huddled in fear in the upper room, and they are lost, and they turn to her and say, "Mary, teach us what you know. Tell us what you know that we don't." And her message is all about turning our hearts to the good. And what does it mean to confront the fears and the dark things in our life that can pull us away from hope? What does it mean to look at them honestly and move through those challenges in a way that hope is affirmed, in a way that the preciousness of human life is affirmed, of each individual? And one of the most important messages in the Gospel of Mary is the idea that the kingdom of heaven is not in the sky or the clouds or elsewhere, but the kingdom of heaven is to be found in the deepest depths of your own heart. That the wisdom that you can find through prayer and meditation and contemplation is always available to you at any moment. And in turning towards that, you rekindle the spark of hope. Well, I think that's a message that is applicable to everybody and that is urgently needed in our time. To not turn away from grief or deny the pain and suffering in the world, but to not be so hardened or cynical that we can't open to joy and new possibilities that really are in front of us at every moment. And I think that's exactly what Mary Magdalene speaks to.
Wonderful. So we're talking about Mary Magdalene for people that are non-Christian or just out there in the world. What did the Da Vinci Code do with Mary Magdalene? I mean, did that bring her out more? Is that a good thing?
I think the Da Vinci Code has been a wonderful thing in one sense, and that it has opened up the dialogue and the conversation, and it certainly inspired people's curiosity about who this pivotal figure is and was. Personally, I feel that the emphasis on the Da Vinci Code was misplaced, because it's exploring that question, that very tantalizing, sensational question of, were Jesus and Mary Magdalene married? Was there a bloodline? Were there children? And what it really ignores is the deeper message of her teaching and the teaching that she was entrusted with as the most faithful disciple of Jesus. So I think it was a wonderful first step in opening up the questions about who she was and what her relationship within Christianity is. And I'm grateful for it for that perspective. But I hope that it's only the first step that many people take, because it really is a sensationalized and in some ways erroneous and misleading story. But it's the portal for so many people to something that's much deeper, much more profound, and much more transformative.
Great. And tell me your personal relationship with Mary Magdalene. How did you find her, get to her, and then what does she mean to you on a daily basis?
Well, my first encounter with Mary Magdalene was when I was 5 years old, and like so many people, I went to go see the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, and I was haunted by the Andrew Lloyd Webber song, "I Don't Know How to Love Him." And in fact, when my piano arrived at my house when I was 8, that was the first song I tried to pluck out and learn to play by ear. So that was my first little encounter with her. It was actually only much later, when I was in my early 30s, that she really came into my life. I had a very, very powerful dream in which she appeared to me, and she said, "If you want to find true Christianity, here is a path that you must follow." And I'll just say that I've been trying to follow that dream ever since, and it has led me to discover things that have brought great meaning and depth to my life, and it's been a fabulous adventure. I've become rather obsessed with art and music and how she's been depicted throughout the centuries. I have at this point about 750 images that I've collected of paintings and sculptures of her throughout the world. And particularly in the visual depictions, what you see is that she really is every woman. She is depicted as being of every age, young and nubile and voluptuous and very, very old and grief-stricken at the end of her life. You see her of every race. You see her with her arms thrown open in joy as she greets her risen Lord, and you see her with her head bowed down in the deepest depths of sorrow. She's an emotional kaleidoscope. And so at that level, artistically, I think she really speaks to each of our hearts, wherever we are, whoever we are. You know, the Virgin Mary, as wonderful and beautiful as she is as an archetypal figure, is always about 23 years old. And she's always fair-skinned, unless you look at the Black Madonnas. And she always looks very serene, even as she's standing at the foot of the cross. Mary Magdalene goes from A to Z. She is the full emotional spectrum of what the human experience is. And so she's a wonderful, wonderful mirror for each of us, no matter where we are in our life journey. So I know that if I'm in the depths of despair, I can turn in my prayer life to her. I know that if I'm filled with hope and joy, she's there as well. She's always accessible. And I think that's one of the other things about her as a very, very potent figure to people who are Christian and non-Christian alike, is that sense that because she's been tarred and feathered with this idea of the world's greatest sinner and the world's greatest redeemed person, there is no place that she has been that we can't go, that we can't turn to her. And that universal acceptance, I think, of what she holds in her iconic position is really important. So in my own private life, my practice life, I turn to the Gospel of Mary and I read it almost every day. It's only 7 pages long, but I find it to be a perpetual source of reminding me of what's truly important in the world. And then in the rhythm of my life every year, I teach courses and workshops and lead pilgrimages. So she really is my constant companion and has helped me draw much closer to what I think of as being the heart of Christianity.
Wonderful. Thank you.